The year is 1342. What is now Eastern Germany was then the fractured duchy of Saxony, a land of cathedrals, cold rivers, and bitter pride. Along the Elbe, where Dresden now stands, nobles rode beneath white banners, while merchants in Leipzig raised red ones in defiance. It was not a war of conquest, but of conviction, brother against brother, city against crown. The smoke of those battles would fade, yet the fault lines they carved still mark the soil of modern Saxony. Every bridge and market built since stands quietly upon the bones of that forgotten civil war. Before we continue this forgotten chapter of Europe's past, tell us in the comments, from where are you watching this story? The year was 1342. Saxony, a land carved between rivers and ambitions, was entering its coldest winter in decades. The wind carried more than snow, it carried rumors. Monks whispered of omens seen above Meissen, soldiers spoke of banners being raised in secret, and merchants, always first to sense change, spoke in lowered tones of taxes that felt like ransom. The elector's word no longer held power beyond his court. It was not a foreign army that threatened Saxony, but the slow unraveling of its own pride. In the marble halls of Dresden, once vibrant with laughter and trade, nobles gathered under torchlight. Their voices rose not in celebration, but accusation. Each blamed the other for Saxony's decay. Old feuds between families like the Wettins and the Meissners resurfaced, wounds never healed from generations past. One lord's words echoed through the chamber: "If the crown cannot rule us, then we shall rule ourselves." That night, the Alliance of White Banners was born, not to protect the land, but to preserve its dying hierarchy. What began as a council ended as a conspiracy. Far from the castles, in the narrow streets of Leipzig, another fire was being lit. The guild masters, men of trade and vision, watched their coins vanish into noble coffers while famine crept into their homes. To them, the white roses were symbols of arrogance, the memory of old chains. So they chose a color of their own, the red of wax seals, of blood, of rebellion. Their oath was simple: no man shall own another's labor again. They armed their apprentices with pikes and muskets, crude and rusted, but fueled by anger and hope. By spring, the countryside between Meissen and Torgau had become a map of divided loyalties. Priests prayed for peace but blessed soldiers instead. Farmers hid their sons in forests, fearing recruitment by either side. The Elbe River, once the calm spine of Saxony's prosperity, now mirrored flames instead of clouds. When riders passed along its banks, villagers turned away. They had learned that both roses, white and red, bled the same color when trampled underfoot. Saxony's soil was no longer fertile for grain. It was fertile for vengeance. The first skirmish came near Colditz. A merchant caravan refused to pay tribute to a noble patrol, claiming allegiance to the red roses. Words became shouts, shouts became steel. When it was over, the snow was blackened with ash and red with blood. The nobles called it treason, the cities called it justice. But the truth was simpler. Saxony had crossed a line it would never return from. Both sides buried their dead quietly, fearing that mourning would reveal their weakness to the enemy and to themselves. In the monasteries, the monks began to record what they saw, not as historians, but as witnesses of their own doom. One wrote, "The land is sick with pride. Each man believes he fights for honor, yet none remember what honor means." And so it began, the War of the White and Red Roses of Saxony. Not a war for land or crown, but for the illusion of righteousness. As snow melted into rivers, so did the boundaries between loyalty and hatred. Saxony had awakened, and the price of awakening would be written in blood. The fires of that first winter did not fade, they only learned to hide. When spring arrived, Saxony's fields bloomed with both flowers and corpses. Villagers rebuilt burned homes using the timber of broken siege engine. Markets reopened, yet every coin carried suspicion. Was it minted under the white or the red? What had once been gossip in taverns now became law in town. The duchy no longer had one ruler, it had two hearts beating against each other. waiting for one to stop. In Dresden, the nobles held council once more. Their robes still smelled of smoke from the war's first embers. Servants poured wine to drown the taste of fear, while messengers whispered of red rose armies forming near Leipzig. One young count asked what all feared to say, "What if the merchants win?" Silence answered him. The elder lords spoke of divine right and lineage, convincing themselves that God still favored them. But even among their marble walls, doubt moved like a draught no door could shut. Leipzig, meanwhile, transformed from a city of trade to a city of steel. The guilds melted silver chalices to forge spearheads. Children carried buckets of water to blacksmiths instead of schoolmasters. The Red Council met in the candlelit cellar of the guild hall, drawing plans upon parchment stained with wax and wine. One voice rose above the others: "If we do not rise together, we will die separately." They did not dream of thrones or crowns, only of freedom, the kind that costs more than gold and less than servitude. By midsummer, the Elbe River had become both border and grave. Boats once filled with goods now ferried spies and deserters. Monasteries along its banks hid fugitives beneath holy vows, their bells tolling to mask the sound of footsteps in the night. Farther north, near Torgau, villages swore allegiance to the Red Rose after the local duke demanded his ancient tithe in the middle of a drought. Hunger turned loyalty into rebellion faster than any sword. The war no longer belonged to armies, it belonged to everyone. The Elector of Saxony, old and weary, watched his authority dissolve like ink in rain. Letters from both factions arrived daily, each claiming to fight for him. He read them in silence, then burned them one by one. His advisor asked which side they should support. The Elector answered, "The side that remembers mercy." But mercy was a language no one in Saxony spoke anymore. His castle became a prison of neutrality, and neutrality was the one crime both roses could not forgive. Autumn came cloaked in ash. Smoke rose again from Meissen's hill as retaliations spread. Fields meant for harvest became battlegrounds for vengeance. Fathers buried sons without knowing which banner they had died beneath. In monasteries, chroniclers wrote less of dates and more of sins. They called this season the Quiet War, for it moved not with trumpets, but with whispers and knives. And through every church and alley, one truth echoed: the seeds of division had grown roots too deep for peace to ever pull them out. Among the nobles of the White Rose, few names carried more fear than Lord Dietrich von Meissen. He was born to command, raised in marble halls that smelled of incense and ambition. His armor, polished to a mirror, reflected not the heaven, but his own conviction. Dietrich believed himself chosen by lineage to restore order to Saxony. He once told his men, "If we bend to merchants, we break before God." Those words would echo through villages long after his body turned to dust. On the opposing side stood Matthias Roeder, a former merchant who had traded silk and iron before he traded peace for revolution. His hands bore calluses instead of rings. His soldiers followed him not out of fear, but belief. They called him the Red Voice, for his speeches could raise farmers to fury and turn fear into courage. "A coin loses value," he said, "but a man's word should never." He was no noble, yet he spoke with the authority of one born to challenge them. The two men never met face to face, yet they shaped each other's fate as if bound by destiny. Dietrich marched with relics and priests. Matthias marched with banners and drums. Both saw themselves as saviors, not destroyers. Both prayed for God's favor and cursed his silence. Their armies grew, fed by desperation and pride. Between them stretched not miles of countryside, but centuries of resentment, one born of privilege, the other of exclusion. Each believed the other's death would heal Saxony. Each was wrong. By early 1344, the land between Meissen and Leipzig had become their chessboard. Dietrich fortified the monasteries, believing sanctity would shield strategy. Matthias struck supply routes instead, understanding that hunger weakens faith faster than fear. Spies moved through the forest, selling secrets for bread or mercy. One monk who witnessed the cruelty of both sides wrote, Neither side fights for God. They fight to see their reflection upon his throne. It was not a war of roses anymore. It was a war for validation. Within the walls of Dresden, the nobles toasted victories they did not earn, while in Leipzig the guild leaders counted dead men as if they were debts repaid. The common people saw no difference between white and red. They saw only fire. Mothers hung both colors from their doors, praying one might spare them. But mercy was a luxury none could afford. When armies marched, loyalty became measured in survival, and survival meant silence. Saxony had become a theater where every man played both tyrant and victim. As the year waned, Dietrich's faith turned to vengeance, and Matthias's hope hardened into resolve. Letters sent by both men still survive, parchment darkened by wax and raid. In one, Dietrich swore that rebellion would be purged with holy fire. In another, Matthias vowed that noble blood would water the roots of freedom. Neither would live to see the outcome, yet both would become legend, symbols of pride, defiance, and the terrible beauty of conviction. Saxony's roses had found their thorn. When the battle ended, Saxony did not celebrate. The morning after was grey, as if the sky itself refused to witness what men had done. The Elbe River ran dark, carrying with it fragments of armor, banners, and limbs. The cries that once filled the air were replaced by an unbearable stillness. Victory was claimed by both sides and believed by none. The field between Meissen and Leipzig was not a triumph. It was a tomb without wall. Lord Dietrich was found among the dead, his armor stripped, his eyes open to a heaven that had long abandoned him. The priests who survived whispered that he died clutching a fragment of his broken sword, as though he still sought to command even death. His men buried him on a hill overlooking the ruins of his camp. A single white rose was laid upon his grave, though no one knew whether it marked honor or irony. Silence became his epitaph. Matthias Roeder lived, but not untouched. A blade had cut through his shoulder, leaving his right arm useless. He wandered among the wounded, searching for those who still breathed. A boy called out to him, asking whether they had won. Matthias looked across the horizon, where smoke covered everything like fog, and answered, "We have survived. That will have to be enough." His words spread among the survivors like scripture. Yet even he knew survival was only another form of punishment. The cities of Saxony greeted their returning soldiers not with cheers, but with fear. The red roses had no gold to rebuild, the white no people to command. Markets reopened over ground still red with memory. Widows lined the churches, clutching rosaries made of bone and brass. The monks who had once recorded prophecies now wrote only lists of the dead, the missing, the forgotten. In their chronicles, they named the war a purge of pride, a phrase that weighed heavier than any casualty count. In Dresden, the elector received the news of Dietrich's death in silence. He ordered no mourning, no statues, no words at all. Instead, he commanded that the battlefields be left untouched, that grass might grow where hatred had burned. His council accused him of cowardice, but the old ruler only said, "Let the land heal itself before men dare to rule again." His decree was ignored, as decrees often are, but his words lingered in the air like the scent of rain before a storm. By the next winter, Saxony had returned to a fragile calm. The rivers froze again, covering the remnants of war beneath glassy stillness. In Meissen, travelers told tales of haunted fields where ghostly banners fluttered without wind. Children were warned not to speak of roses, neither white nor red, for fear the land would awaken again. And yet, in every church and home, the question endured. What had they won? The answer, whispered only by the wind, was simple: nothing but silence. The war had ended, but peace never arrived. Saxony was not rebuilt. It simply resumed breathing, shallow and uneven. Winter passed, and the wounds beneath the snow began to fester. Nobles returned to their keeps, hollow-eyed and poorer than when they had left. The merchants reclaimed the cities, but trade had turned into extortion and wealth into ash. Every man who had survived now sought payment, not in gold, but in justice. What they meant by justice depended entirely on what they had lost. Matthias Roeder became the reluctant leader of a country that no longer wished to be led. His followers called him the Guardian of the Red Rose, though the title weighed heavier than the armor he could no longer wear. He walked through the rebuilt markets of Leipzig, seeing banners of white hung beside red, as if memory could be rewritten through decoration. When asked if vengeance would continue, he said, "No sword can mend a heart." Yet in the same breath, he ordered every surviving noble to swear fealty or face exile. Mercy, even now, had conditions. In Meissen, the remnants of the White Rose gathered in shadowed hall. Among them rose a new voice, young, sharp, and untainted by defeat. His name was Ulrich von Wartenberg, a cousin of Dietrich, whose rage burned like inheritance. He spoke of redemption, of restoring the honor stolen by merchants and rebels. Saxony cannot kneel before its own servants, he declared, and the desperate applauded. The White Rose would not fade quietly. It would bloom again, nourished by the blood of the forgotten. Rumors spread faster than armies once had. Villages whispered of executions in secret courtyards, of Red Rose soldiers dragging priests from their altars, of nobles vanishing along the Elbe without trace. Matthias denied it publicly, but the silence of his officers told another truth. The lines between justice and revenge dissolved until even he could not distinguish them. When his wife asked him whether God still guided his hand, he replied, "If he does, I no longer recognize his touch." Meanwhile, the Electors' Council returned to power like ghosts reclaiming an empty throne. Their decrees promised stability, yet every law passed felt like another shackle upon the people. Taxes were reinstated, armies reorganized, and spies sent to every corner of the duchy. They called it restoration. The people called it betrayal. In the Great Hall of Dresden, where both roses once petitioned for peace, the council hung neither color. Instead, they draped the walls in black, a warning to all that loyalty was now measured in silence. By 1347, the war had become legend, and the reckoning its epilogue. Saxony stood united again, but not whole. The Elbe flowed clean once more, yet beneath its calm surface lay centuries of unspoken grief. Matthias disappeared from the chronicles after that year, perhaps dead, perhaps hiding. Ulrich's rebellion never found its bloom. The roses of Saxony had wilted, but their thorns remained, buried deep in the conscience of a land that mistook order for peace. And in every quiet church, a single prayer endured, that no man's justice ever taste like vengeance again. Centuries passed, and Saxony changed its face, but not its soul. The castles crumbled, rebuilt, and crumbled again, yet beneath each stone lay the bones of the war that never truly ended. The white and the red had long lost their banners, but not their meanings. One came to symbolize pride and lineage, the other defiance and freedom. The people forgot the battles, but they remembered the division. History had become memory, and memory had become identity. By the time the Reformation swept across Europe, the same soil that once drank the blood of brothers became a stage for new convictions. Churches that had survived the roses now split once more, not by banners, but by faith. The nobles aligned with Rome, the merchants turned to Luther. Old wounds found new words. Priests preached unity while sharpening their sermons into swords. It was said that Saxony had never learned peace, only how to change the color of its cause. The Elbe River, eternal witness of men's ambitions, flowed on, past Meissen, Dresden, and Leipzig, carrying echoes of forgotten wars beneath its silver surface. Travelers of later centuries spoke of its calm, unaware that its depths were layered with ghosts. Fishermen claimed to pull up bones instead of carp, relics instead of shells. Yet the river endured, patient and unjudging, as if to remind Saxony that time does not heal, it only conceals. Every reflection upon its water was a mirror of what had once been spilled into it. Through the industrial age, Saxony rose again, a land of factories and invention, where machines replaced horses and smoke replaced fog. Yet even then, the spirit of the roses lingered. The nobility returned as barons of industry, and the merchants as magnates of trade. Wealth again divided the people, and progress wore the same mask as power. In the clang of steel and the hum of engines, one could almost hear the echo of those medieval drums still beating somewhere deep within the land. The 20th century brought new banners, new ideologies, and the same old hunger for dominance. Dresden burned again, not from feud, but from firebombs. The Elbe turned black once more, not with blood, but with ash. And when Germany was split by walls and wire, Saxony found itself divided yet again, one part under iron, the other under fear. The world called it politic. History recognized it as repetition. The roses had bloomed once more, though few dared to name their color. Now, in the quiet of modern Germany, tourists walk across bridges built where knights once drowned and merchants once knelt. They admire the beauty of Dresden's skyline, unaware that its stones remember. Beneath the laughter of markets and the sound of trains lies the rhythm of 1,000 forgotten oaths. Saxony's story did not end, it simply learned to whisper. And if you listen closely by the banks of the Elbe, you can still hear it. The faint echo of roses, red and white, forever intertwined. Time, the quiet conqueror, has erased the banners, but not the meaning behind them. Saxony stands today as a land of peace, its fields green, its rivers clean, yet beneath that calm lies the echo of centuries. The soil that once drank blood now feeds vineyards and gardens. Children play where armies fell, and laughter replaces the clash of steel. But every gust of wind that moves across the plains still carries something unseen. Memory disguised as air. History pretending to be silent. Historians debate who won the war, as if victory was something that could survive centuries. The truth is simpler. No one ever does. The nobles who fought for legacy lost their names to time. The merchants who fought for freedom became the next ruling class. The wheel turned, and with each rotation, men mistook its motion for progress. A chronicler once wrote that Saxony's curse was not its wars, but its refusal to forget them. He was not wrong. In Meissen's cathedral, the sun falls through stained glass and paints the stone floor red and white, though no artist intended it. Tourists walk beneath the light, taking pictures of beauty born from tragedy. They do not see the ghosts watching them, content that the world still remembers, even if it does not understand. The monks who once recorded the war are gone, but their words remain, written in fading ink. Pride births sorrow. Sorrow births remembrance. And remembrance, like a shadow, never dies. On the banks of the Elbe, an old fisherman once told a traveler that when the river freezes, you can hear whispers beneath the ice. He claimed they are the voices of those who fought, trapped forever between forgiveness and pride. The traveler laughed, yet that night he dreamt of roses blooming under snow, one white, one red, melting into each other until only the color of humanity. Perhaps myths are the only truths time allows to survive. Every century finds its own way to repeat the mistakes of the last. The colors may change, the flags may differ, but the hearts that wave them beat with the same hunger, to be remembered, to be right, to be eternal. The men of the 14th century believed they fought for Saxony. Those who came after believed they fought for God, or nation, or ideology. In the end, they all fought against the same enemy, forgetfulness. And forgetfulness always wins quietly. So the curtain falls, not with thunder, but with a sigh. The story of the white and red roses becomes one with the earth that buried them. Yet as long as someone speaks their name, they endure, fragile, flawed, and human. History is not a lesson, it is a mirror. Look closely into it and you will see yourself reflected in its crack. Perhaps the roses were never truly white or red. Perhaps they were always the color of every heart that dared to believe it was right.